also for the nice introduction of me and my person. I will try to speak in English, although my school English is not so good, and my English, when I represented people before the court in international, in like English or United States courts, is long ago. And so and in order to not to speak too long, I have written it down, and please excuse me if I try to read now as quick as possible. Normally, I prefer a dialogue. I don't like to speak alone and then wait for half an hour for a response or questions, but to make a dialogue in the whole event. But this is would be much too long, I think. So I would like to commence to start with my time, what we do as the International League for Human Rights. What do we mean by human rights? And I have written it in my speech in English. You can, if you want, you can later, you can study it thoroughly, because it's a bit complicated. And we are fighting for the human rights of, for instance, a list of activities for the Palestinians to prepare this big event with Majid Al-Zar, and which is several pages long. Only the list of what we have already done for the Palestinians in the last 10 or 15 years. So you can study this if you are interested. What are our purposes of the League? The first one is to promote and politically implement human rights, to care for the politically, racially, and religiously persecuted, the marginalized, refugees, the gender disadvantaged prisoners, the mentally, physically, and emotionally disabled, or ill. What does this mean? The idea of international understanding in our written aspect, we are gemeinnützige, I don't remember the right English translation, organization, and we have a written Satzung, a written statute. The first point, which is important in this context, is the observations of collective protective rights as enshrined in the United Nations Charter for the full realization of individual and collective rights as set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of December 1948, then in the International Convention of December 1966 on civil and political rights, the so-called Civil Pact, and economic and social and cultural rights, Social Pact, and finally in the European Convention on Human Rights of November 1950. These are binding points for our activities. This must be sufficient for the moment, otherwise it would be too long. But you can read all this on our website and all what we have done until now on this point. And you find also there's an important institution in Germany, the Deutsche Institut für Menschenrechte, German Institute of Human Rights, which is financed by the Bundestag, the parliament, and they have very well understandable definitions of all these, what this means, these pacts and so on, and what has been done until now on these. Now I come to, if you want, a critical introduction. Don't expect an easy to grasp or easy to understand lecture from me. Unfortunately, the subject matter is too contradictory and too complicated for that. Not only is the content of the various international human rights partly disputed and contradictory in the application by the competent courts. This applies even more in a politically difficult and controversial situation, such as the wars in the Near or better Middle East. So I can point out and outline these contradictions, but I cannot present them in a generally understandable way in a quarter of an hour. Nevertheless, it seems important to me to at least touch on the different and ambivalent aspects in order to advance the necessary debate about human rights for Palestinians in Western Europe. For Germans and in Germany, it is very important to know that we have towards Israel an official statement which says Israel is Staatsräson. Israel is state reason, literally translated, raison d'etat. Israel is something special. You are not allowed to touch it. This also plays a devastating role in this context, and I cannot avoid referring to the commentary of Evelyn Hecht-Galinski. Maybe most of you don't know her. She's a Jewish famous author and writer, and to introduce her, because I have a quotation later also from her, I can tell you something. She is a member, the founder of the German section of the organization Jewish Voice for Just Peace in the Middle East, and daughter, and this is important, of the former chairman of the Central Council of Jews in Germany for decades, from 1942 until 1992. He was the chairman of this important, the only official organization of Jewish community in Germany. And because they were persecuted, his family was persecuted under the Nazi fascism. And because she is Jewish, her critics on Germany, on the German state, on the and against Israel's war, they can't just say, "Oh, she's anti-Semite. You can't listen to her," because she is Jewish, and she is one of the most famous, comes from one of the most famous families in Germany. And she says, as a German with Jewish roots, I am appealed, by current development, and can only hope that the racist murder of the Egyptian, that is one of the cases she told me. I was the lawyer of the family who was killed, the Marwa El-Shabini, and so she made a statement on that, and generalized it, and said and came to the conclusion, we must be careful that anti-Muslim racism is not made a German raison. And so I would like, I have these two aspects are very close together, the Palestinians and the Muslims, the anti-Muslim. I have written a book from my cases study for 20 years, Feindbild Islam und institutioneller Rassismus, enemy picture of Islam and institutional racism, the working of human rights, under human rights, for human rights, in times of migration and anti-terrorism. That is one of the big problems we have. I will explain you later that all those who criticize Germany and the German politics now are prosecuted as terrorists. So now I come to my first important point and case I would like to explain to you. My activities for Palestinians in the last decades, especially for the PRC. You probably know, I don't need to explain. Majid Al-Ser is the representative of the London-based and in the UN officially recognized until now organization, Palestinian Refugee Center. I have successfully, represented the Palestinian PRC based in London with Majid Al-Ser against defamation by the major German weekly magazine Der Spiegel in the last decade. We have not yet been able to achieve such a remarkable success in the current court case against much more serious defamations by Majid Al-Ser and his friends. My colleague, lawyer Tobias Krenzel, with whom I work together in our office in the House of Democracy and Human Rights, is a big center in Berlin. I quote him, he says, Majid Al-Ser and numerous other Palestinians who advocate politically for the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people in Germany and Europe were the target of extensive search measures at the end of 2023 on the basis of the law on associations and at the instigation of the Federal Ministry of the Interior and for Homeland. The direct cause was the event of October 7th, 2020 last year, and the ban of the Hamas association. Majid Al-Ser and others are accused in this context of being secret Hamas supporters. The reason given was their political activity, which in itself is objectively, as well as alleged personal acquaintances. An alleged connection to Hamas is thus based solely on a highly problematic so-called contact guild. We call it contact guild. And without the persons concerned being personally and specifically accused of any actions or any concrete crimes, so that the constructed suspicions against the persons concerned of derived only from alleged connections of the persons concerned to other non-prohibited organizations and other persons. An appeal against the search warrants before the High Administration Court of Berlin, Brandenburg, was unsuccessful. The court apparently considered the statement of the persons concerned per se to be of less value than unsubstantial official suspicions. The constitutional required protection against state intervention was thereby significantly reduced at the expertise of the persons concerned without any valid justification. We are now lodging a constitutional complaint. That's our next step. My colleague says, against the decision of the ground, on the grounds, excuse me, of the significant violations of fundamental and human rights. These measures, which have so far been confirmed by the courts, represents a further facet of ongoing state repressions. Eine Facette, also a new step of ongoing state repressions against advocates of the Palestinian people, which appears to be politically motivated. That's the words of my colleague, the quotation. That this fight, my commentary, will not be easy on the legal front is obvious and is underpinned by further serious human rights violations by Palestinians in Germany, which I would now like to briefly address.
I'm sorry, because you wanted the conversation, so maybe we will let time for the conversation about your subject for later. Is it okay? Because we should give time to...
Yes, but do I have already spoken 20 minutes? Yeah? I thought it was 10 minutes. Then I will just briefly tell you the 2 or 3 cases which are
the idea of the case is
one is also a Palestinian student called Reem Savil, who fled from Lebanon via Scandinavia to Germany, and also already in the last decade I represented her successfully because she was accused of anti-Semitism and with her family sitting in a place with a card on the Near East without Israel and so on. And now on the 7th of October last year, she was accused by the 3 biggest newspapers in Germany, Bild, BZ and Focus, to be a supporter of the terrorist Hamas on the same day and the same night. This was ridiculous. She's a very open-minded and musician. She plays piano and so on with, of course, all people, also Jewish. She even plays in Catholic churches and so on. But we could not, until now, we were not successful in our fight, and we hope that we can get further support also from you And there are two other cases I wanted to explain, but maybe you can send it to other to the round and those who are interested in the cases, because they show the ambiguity, as I explained. We have the means normally in the written, in our written laws and written statements, but in reality, it is extremely difficult to realize that in the court, and we need the support of all the critical and persons who are not blind and who can see the realities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz.